just want to let you know, I'm sort of in the middle of giving an oral exam to a PhD student along with two other professors. They're in there right now grilling them. I'm going to have to go, like, duck out a little bit in the middle of your
not a problem.
I'll try to come back at the end.
Sure. And if you need there, I can introduce myself. That's fine if you'd rather.
Yeah, well, I'll get us started.
You sure? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'll let you discuss yourself, but there are things I have to say at the beginning.
Oh, okay.
There are students who are taking this for a class.
Oh my gosh, really?
Well, yeah.
If I would have known that, I would have thought a little more about the presentation.
I know, I'm sure it's... Okay, so let me make sure I have the title. Public Transportation Financing. Okay.
What was it? I'm pretty close to that.
Yeah. Okay, everyone, let's begin today's seminar. I'm John Glebe, and I am the professor here. Before we get started in introducing our speaker, Michael Ward from Oregon DOT, I'd like to go around the room just so he knows who he's talking to and have you introduce yourselves. I'm going to also pass around a sign-in sheet for the students who are in the class. Ask you to please initial and sign in. So while that's going around, why don't we start with you, and then we'll just go around.
Robert Steele, Civil Engineering undergrad.
I'm Jessica Tom from Private Project Planning Program.
Huh?
Please try that up with. I'm Adam, a master's student in Ryan Grassroots Program Administrator. Jason Barber, transportation activist, advocate, and enthusiast.
Tomorrow resident. Graduate student.
Catherine Gibson from FTA
Paul Pivot, grad student, entering the civil program as well. I'm David Rullis. I'm in the Master of Urban and Regional Planning Program.
Bob Kellett, also the work program.
Kyle Johnson, I'm in the Master's.
Ryan Commute, first year.
Carl Levy, community development undergrad.
Ali Zahir, senior civil engineering.
Chris Smith, I'm a transportation activist and member of the board for Streetcar.
Yeah.
Amanda Owens, I'm a nurse graduate student in student president.
Alex Pagazzi, civil engineering undergrad.
South Price, civil engineering undergrad. Adi Amin, transportation engineer.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start the video going. Good. There you are.
Oh my gosh.
I'm going to let this
We need to put a cover over that.
Yeah, it's better you than me. I just want to remind you at the end, this seminar is scheduled to go for 1 hour, but maybe the last 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes, we'll break for questions, or however you'd like to handle it.
I kind of like the interactive approach, so if as a slide comes up and I make some comments, if you have a question, why don't you just throw them on out and we'll try to deal with it that way, and if we run at 1 o'clock, we run to 1 o'clock.
Okay, good. And I just want to remind you all to use the microphone thingies on your desk. Press the little button when you ask a question. Ryan has the handheld mic in case you happen to be in front of someplace that doesn't have a working microphone. With that, Michael, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you very much. Let me introduce myself just briefly. I'm Michael Ward. I'm the administrator of the Public Transit Division of the Oregon Department of Transportation. We're kind of a small division, 15 people. A lot of folks, when they think of ODOT, they think of highway. They should. They have 4,500 people. And so my little band of do-gooders, we try to do what we can to encourage public transit across the state. And then this specific conversation will be about the funding that my division handles as we support public transit around the state. And so let me, if I remember how to do this, that's right. I tried to find a slide that indicated how complicated and convoluted and almost unintelligible public transit financing has become over the 30 or 40 years that most of these federal programs have been in place. I'll talk later in the presentation about the state program. State program is a little more straightforward. It's only been around since 1985, but it definitely takes a lot of thought and energy to try to figure this out. I'll back up just a little bit. I've been with public transportation for about 2.5 years now. Prior to that, I spent 28 years with your most favorite state agency, DMV. I've just now kind of figured out that I no longer feel like I'm drinking out of a fire hose with trying to figure out public transit. It's a very interesting mix of programs. This is a slide that shows my budget. And most of you will immediately recognize that this does not talk about all of public transit funding in Oregon. For example, TriMet. TriMet's operating budget is about $230 million. Lane Transit, if you combine their operating and capital, is probably $65 million or so. Salem Kaiser operating and capital, probably about 40, and those are the three biggest mass transit districts in Oregon. So you should see from this slide who my customers are. They're Klamath Falls, Community Connections of Wallowa County, Lincoln County. It's the small urban, small rural public transit providers, around 200 around the state, that we use to divvy up about $63 million a biennium. So I've been in the state government for a long time. I will speak of biennial numbers, not annual. So if you have a question, I'll try to clarify that. But I've just grown up in state government, so I'm always in Oregon 2-year cycle. This is for this current biennium, 0709, about $63 million. We push through our doors about 42.5 on the federal side, and our state program about $20 million out the door to about 235 small rural providers. So again, not talking about the whole public transit funding picture in Oregon, just the small little piece that I deal with. Now this gets back to that first screen of this complicated formula. Here are all the programs that we try to manage with our dedicated staff of 15 as we try to sort those monies and then get them out the door and comply with all the various rules and regulations that come along with federal money. Anyone here think you get federal money for free and no strings attached? Good. You don't. Lots of strings, lots of forms. The money can only be used in certain ways. It has to be directed toward elderly and disabled. It has to be directed toward low income. And so we have to gather that data. Local providers have to collect that data. We have to report it to national databases. So it's a very cumbersome and complex process to take federal money. As you move into organizations, they've made a concerted effort to, made a concerted decision to take federal dollars, knowing that there's a heavy onus on accepting that money and the reporting of it. But just briefly, the Special Transportation Fund, that's a state program, and we'll talk about that later. Transportation options is a generic term. I still get confused. I hear it called transportation demand management. People tell me the terminology is now moving to transportation options. It's about those non-traditional kinds of public transit programs, park and rides, rideshare databases, employer incentives, TMAs, Transportation Management Associations, that help relieve parking stresses. Planning, lots of planning. My little piece of the world, we get money so that we can give it out to MPOs in other small areas to do planning around public transit in their counties or cities or in their districts. New Freedom. New Freedom. New Freedom is a program that's a couple years old, maybe 3 or 4 now. It's designed to provide funds for public transit agencies that want to provide services that are new and beyond the existing ADA requirements. JARC, Job Access Reverse Commute. That's, again, a fairly new program, 3 or 4 years old. Goes back to the current authorization at the congressional level for safety lieu. It's money targeted to provide public transportation for low income to getting to and from work. I didn't know it either until I asked. Reverse commute. Historically, public transportation was about getting folks from the suburbs to the urban downtown center 30, 40 years ago. Now the jobs are the other way, so it's the reverse commute, getting folks from downtown urban areas out to where the jobs are in the suburbs. More of a large city metropolitan kind of comment, but that's the name of the program, JARC. Elderly and persons with disabilities, again, a federal program. Everything other than special transportation I'm talking about, those are all federal programs. So here's another federal program specifically targeted about providing funds for public transit agencies to use to support capital purchases for services directed at elderly and people with disabilities. And last, rural and small urban, another federal program directed at small urban and rural areas for operations. Capital is purchasing buses, building facilities, shelters, those sorts of things. Operations, bus driver salaries, overhead, those kinds of things. So here you have 2 separate programs designed to provide various bits of funding for what you and I think is just a single entity trying to provide public transit. And again, the focus is rural, general public, for the rural and small urban. Questions?
Yeah, please, just for your reference, what's the total ODOT budget?
Well, total ODOT budget or total my budget?
Total ODOT budget. I just want to know what percentage is going to public transit.
Good luck. The total ODOT budget is don't quote me on this, I think it's $3.2, $3.5 billion. Most of that is gas tax revenue. Good segue though, good comment, I appreciate that. Gas tax, that's a key that's a key transportation funding source in the state of Oregon. Can you use it for public transit? Now, I was told I can ask you guys questions. No, you cannot. Title fees. You go in and transfer the title on your car, or registration fees. Can you use any component of those fees that are generated, and we're talking hundreds of millions, for public transit? No. Constitution of Oregon is written so constrained, and there's been several Attorney General's opinions, has to be for highway use. So public transit falls outside that. So I don't have access to gas tax revenues or car registration fees for public transit. Now I'm going to see who's paying attention, because later in the slide I'm going to double back on one of those little comments. We'll see if you catch it. So the ODOT budget, several $billion, public transit, and keep in mind, this is all federal dollars. This is the only small component that the state of Oregon provides for public transit, $19 million. Out of the general fund budget, $15 billion. Oops. This is an imaginary revenue source for a public transit provider. My staff well, it's my fault. When I first got to public transit, I knew what a bus was, and that was about it. So in working with my staff to understand these, I always use the imaginary town of Wagon Tire, Oregon. You know, tell me how a wagon tire would do this. So they always rib me when I put together a slide like this. This is a composite average of a rural public transit provider and where they get their money. So local, from their local general fund, they might have donations. They may have other grants. It's not unusual to have a local citizen donate money to a public transit agency. Fare box. A lot of the public thinks that, you know, the buck you put into a rider, the 50 cents or whatever it is, covers a lot of their costs of the public transit. That's not true. And actually, the 18% is probably a little on the high side. It's even less for a TriMet or a Salem Kaiser or an Lane Transit District. Fare box, 15–18%. You're doing very well. So it's these other sources of funds that public transit providers have to manage to try to deliver all the services that you see out there. Federal, state. And again, going back to that very first slide, how do you grab all these pieces of funds that are available to you, comply with all the various requirements, and then turn those into a way to fund your program? I'm going to quickly, well, as quickly as I can, walk through some of the specific federal programs, go through it, tell you what the program is, and respond to questions if you have any. Again, these are federal programs. They're all administered by the Federal Transit Administration, FTA. They come to us on a yearly basis. It takes an act of Congress, an apportionment, that delegates these monies to the Federal Transit Administration. They use a fairly complex formula to figure out how much each state gets. So that's all done sort of in Washington. They send me a check for, you know, $6 or $7 million, not really, and then we give it out to, in this particular program, 38 providers around the state. It is given out on a formula basis. Formula currently has 3 components: population, rides given, and miles traveled. And we have someone in the audience today. My division is working with PSU and Dr. Bertini to re-examine our existing formula that we use to distribute these funds. And Amanda and another student, and I don't see Heaven here, we've engaged them 3 or 4 months ago, asked them to come in, do a search of this country. How do other states divvy this money up? And then come back to us with a recommendation. What is a fair, and all FTA requires is that you have a fair and equitable distribution. Fair and equitable means there's 50 people in this room. I'll bet y'all each would have 50 different definitions of fair and equitable. So we've asked Amanda and to do the research and come back to my division, and we have a Citizens Advisory Group called the Public Transit Advisory Committee, and come back with a recommendation how we could modify our formula to be fair and equitable in the distribution of those funds. What else? The funds are pretty flexible. They can be used for operations, technology improvements, and capital requirements. The thing about the slide that you should notice here, and you'll see it on the other ones, is there's a match requirement. The feds believe that that the local jurisdictions, the local entities should have some skin in the game. So they don't give you all of it. Here's half, here's 20%. You have to find the other amount of money. And of course, do they make it easy? No. 43.92. Go figure. 10.27. So it's very difficult. It gets very, not difficult, we all can do the math, but it's very complex when you're sitting out there in, Tillamook trying to juggle 5 or 6 different funding sources and having to remember what match rate you have to use for that expenditure that you want me to reimburse you for. A very, very odd way to do this. The other thing is all these programs require local match, and we saw the other slide, local dollars. So at some point, and we do have this happen almost every year, there are some small rural counties that essentially say, I give. I can't find enough local match to take advantage of all the money, all the federal money that would be coming my way. So if you have a small tax base or don't have a lot of local revenue monies, you leave federal money on the table. Not quite when Harney County tells us, you know, I can't use all that money. We take the money back and then we just throw it back through our formula. So we don't give any money back to the feds. We just redistribute it with the other agencies that are eligible for this kind of funds. Part of this program, and I meant to tell you, if you, for whatever reason, you end up in the public transit agency, and we have a couple here, this program is called the 5311 program. It refers to the section in the federal statute that created it, 5311. So this is a component of 5311. It's called our inner city program. What the feds say is, you know, here's $7 million. Oh, but by the way, you have to use 15% of that to fund inner city rural bus service. So we take that 15% off, and then we go out through a competitive process and ask for folks who want to provide bus service from, in my home, from Silverton to Salem, from La Pine to Bend, from LeGrand to Baker City. And so we have providers around the state that do that for us, and this is how they get reimbursed. And here's another example of trying to fulfill the requirements of the program. And so we have the Amtrak thruway bus connections that allow folks to catch from a train connection to a bus. So you see Redmond to Chemalt, Astoria to Portland, and Coos Bay to Ontario. It's not that bad. I mean, in some of my early months, I made the pledge or promise to my staff that I'd do on Coos Bay to Ontario, but I'm hoping they have forgotten. But part of the funding does help provide those connections between other modes. So train to airport, and you see those listed here. Again, the match rates, you have to come up with your share of the money to make the programs work.
Michael, I have a question.
Sure.
You had mentioned before that it's a reimbursement program. How does that work on the match?
Well, what happens is, we'll keep the number simple, at least for me. Let's say you have a $100 expense, and let's say the match rate is 50-50. So you would send me the invoice for $100 for an eligible expense, and we would send you back $50. So, and again, it's not only do the providers on the end have to figure out what program they're applying the expense to, because they all run different things, and so you can't have a provider who's doing your typical rural general public, 5311, and also has a component that the other slide that did some inner city bus service. So they try to make sure the expense lines up with the program that they're trying to get reimbursed for. And then we do ask, where'd the local match come from? Is it eligible as local match for that program? The other big part of our program is, again, an FTA program around transportation for elderly individuals and people with disabilities. It's about $14.5 million a biennium for us, and it's primarily designed for capital. Most of the money is spent on buying wheelchair accessible vans, large buses. You've seen the buses around town that have like a door cut in the side. Those are called cutaways, and they are for the transportation of those individuals that use mobility devices. They probably got funded with money from this program. And again, primarily used to fund capital projects like buses, vans, other equipment. Again, a local match. So the cutaway buses I described, about $125,000. So we're going to they're going to match that about 90%. You've still got to find the other 10% for the purchase of those buses. Oh yeah.
The typical funding source for the local funds, is it city or county, and is it property taxes or sales taxes?
Yes, it would. When we get to the state program that I described, that's one source. The other one is the general funds of the city or county in which the public transit provider might deliver service. So they're out there along with sheriffs and libraries and firefighters and all those competing for that general fund pot that might be available to a Deschutes County or to a Wheeler County.
And what was the high catch rate in the last slide?
Well, I didn't want to embarrass her, but my daughter's in the audience today, so and now you know her name. Get back to JARC, Job Access Reverse Commute. Those services tend to be a provider will put in a route that goes from, say, a downtown area to a mall, to a light industrial or heavy industrial area where there are jobs. They'll run it'll fund not programs, they'll run routes later in the evening so folks can get to work and get back from work. Again, fairly new, last 5-6 years program. Who thinks $2.5 million is a lot of money? It's not. This program is required to be competitive and fair and equitable. So if you want a piece of this pie, you have to submit an application to me. We create the application, and you have to tell us what kind of services you want to provide, how many riders you think you'll have, what the cost per mile will be, and we'll sort through 24 applications. Well, in this last go round, we had about $1 million. And again, this is a biannual number. We had about $1.5 million, $1.8 million requests for 1 year's worth of that. So we have about twice the amount of requests for the amount of funding we can get. But again, the point is, here's another slice of the pie that folks are trying to get onto to help fund the programs that they want to do. And they're all targeted at either elderly and people with disabilities, or in this case, low income. Those folks that probably have the least able to depend on a car or a vehicle to get around, and so these programs are designed to try to fund those kinds of public transit services that they can use. Mentioned earlier in my opening comments about New Freedom. Again, a fairly new program. It's designed for services that are new and above the existing requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act. One example of that is, in some cases, a provider will provide curb-to-curb service. And so they can use this money to provide door-to-door service. ADA doesn't require a public transit system to provide door-to-door service. You get to the curb, we'll take you and drop you off at the curb. You can use this money, however, as one example, as to find the funds to do door-to-door service. Again, pretty small piece of the pie. We get lots of requests for these funds, not enough to go around. And you see the match rates. Again, these are easy, 20/50, different than the others. Again, another example of a burden that a small provider would have to try to manage to figure out how to get as much money as they can out of this. Planning's the same kind of thing, same kind of program. This is money that comes to public transit. If you're familiar with MPOs, they also get planning monies. This component is for me to give monies to various agencies to make sure they include transit in their transportation planning. And you see we've listed the MPOs in the state up there. Talked a little bit about transportation options. A small amount of money. The state does have greenhouse gas emission goals. We are trying to use the money to promote rideshare programs, park and ride lots, employer incentives, those kinds of things. Anyone here have seen a Drive Less, Save More commercial? Thank you. Thank you. We fund that program. It's one of the few in the country that have actually taken the public service announcement approach to trying to let people know that there's very, very simple ways that you can reduce your energy costs, you can reduce your carbon footprint, you can reduce greenhouse gases, and in so doing, help with the transportation issues in your community. Very successful. We're in the Portland metropolitan area. I think this is year 3 or 4. I've asked for additional funds out of the legislature so we take that program statewide. But it's a really good example of, for about 75 years, we've been focused on one side of the equation. And what side of the equation is that? The supply side. Let's build more lane. Let's build more capacity. And not very much energy on the demand side. Drive Less, Save More, transportation options is designed to, do you really need to make that trip? Can you trip chain? Can you work from home? Telecommuting is another transportation options possibility. Can you do things that don't require you to make a trip at all? So just a little bit of effort trying to get the people to think about the supply side of that whole equation about how you manage your own mobility. That's all the federal programs, and so now we're talking about the state program. And here's my test. The state program is composed of 3 revenue sources, and I'll ask you if you understand why they're that way. The first one is cigarette tax. So if you buy cigarettes, thank you, don't smoke them, but buy more. Don't smoke. But 2 cents on that pack goes to me. That raises about $8 million a biennium, and we spend it on public transit. Can anyone figure out why we would use cigarette tax to fund public transportation? Good, because no one else can. When you go back to how it started and ask legislators at the time, it was there. So there's no real good nexus. And as unlike the gas tax, very easy. Gas, road, pay tax, get roads, easy to understand. Public understands that. Cig tax, who knows? Item 2, anyone have an identification card issued by DMV? Thank you. It takes DMV about $12 to issue that card. They charge $20 or $30. Who gets the leftover? I do. That brings in about $3.5 million for me to spend on public transportation. The nexus between an ID card and public transit? Not too good. And again, one of our current Oregon Transportation Commission members was a legislator at the time that this happened, when they devoted those excess revenues to us. His name is Commissioner Alan Brown. And when I've asked him about it, he said it was just there. It was an easy way to do it. Third source. Yes?
Well, isn't there a rationale that if you have an ID card, it probably means you don't have a driver's license, so you're likely to be a non-driver who needs transportation services, right?
That's true, and there is a stronger nexus to ID cards than others, but that's not the case for all ID card users. But you're right, there's a little more of a tie. But when you talk to some of the folks who were in the legislature at the time that decision was made, it was just a handy revenue mechanism that they could latch onto. There was momentum going through the legislature. DMV were increasing fees anyway. We'll just add a little more, change the statute, and we'll throw it at public transit. But no, you're right. There is a little stronger nexus there than the cigarette tax. Third source of funding is something called the Transportation Operating Fund. It's internal to ODOT. Anyone ever buy gasoline for your lawnmower or your snowblower or your jet ski or your four-wheel drive, something you use off-road? Paid gas tax on that gas, I'll bet. You didn't have to. Now, of course, would we make it easy for you not to pay tax? No, 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 no. You have to fill out a form. You have to send it off to us. We have to verify it, and we'll send you back your gas tax that you did not have to spend on that gas that was not used public transit. Who does that? Nobody. So we use another college, OSU, I believe, and they go out and calculate how much that is, how much that would be. And of course, you're all college graduates, and there's ways to figure that stuff out. So they do that, and they create what's called the Transportation Operating Fund. Internally, we call it the Lawnmower Fund because it's gas taxes that were paid for gas that you didn't have to. I get a big share of that. So those are my three revenue sources: SIG tax, ID card, TOF, or Lawnmower Fund. Comes to about an $18 to $20 million program. This is saying $20 million. Going to be closer to 18 or 19 this biennium, and why? Three revenue sources. SIG tax, smokers go down? Not so much. ID cards? Yes. And that's because back in February of 2008, the governor issued an executive order that said you have to show us better identification to get an Oregon ID card. So far, we've seen ID card sales off about 30%. Since then. Big change, and we were able to fund our program because we had a beginning balance. Going to be kind of tough next biennium, except that we've asked the legislature to give us an ID card fee increase to make up the offset. And I'm not sure how many of you are politically motivated. If you've been following the governor's Jobs and Transportation Act that started off as House Bill 2120, is now 2001, and is now 2001A engrossed 23 amendments, 23. Our ID card surcharge has survived that process, so I'm hoping that that'll be in the final product, and we'll get back to a reasonable level on our ID card component of our state fund. Getting back to your question, they can use this money for match. So we have 42 transportation district, counties, tribes. Total is 42. Again, we use a formula, population, and there's a subcomponent around elderly and people with disabilities. And so if you're a county or the federal tribe, we figure out what your population is, and here's your money. And so that's local money that can be used to match all those federal programs. And the law is written very specifically. It has to be for seniors and people. It has to go to support services for seniors and people with disabilities. Usually not too hard to do because almost all the general public, seniors and people with disabilities, we provide accommodations for. Its statute again says that we give out 75% of that by a formula. The other 25% of it we use as a discretionary program. So you submit an application to us, tell us what you want to use the money for us. We try to strike a balance between objective and some sort of subjective evaluation, award those grants, and then get those monies out to folks. So let me stop right there. That's my little piece of the world. 5 or 6 federal programs, $43, $45 million. A state component, $20 million thereabouts. 235 providers around the state that I deal with. Not so much TriMet. not so much Salem-Kaiser, not so much LTD, Rogue Valley or Bend, those are the big ones. All the smaller ones, they all have various programs that take bits and pieces of those funds. They try to merge them together and provide services to their constituents and their customers. So, any questions about the puzzle that is public transit? Sir.
Do your programs ever apply inside MPO boundaries, or are you exclusively outside MPO boundaries?
The planning ones do, but most of the inside MPO boundaries, they're funded directly from FTA. TriMet, for example, they get almost all of the money directly from the FTA, never goes through my hands. If I did, I'd try to find a way to keep some of it. So those MPOs deal directly with FTA on their fundings. It gets a little, not dicey, it gets a little complicated if they also branch outside their MPO boundaries and provide rural services, then they qualify for my funds. Who's heard about, oh, sir. And you might not remember, but I remember you. How are you?
Okay, my question is, so is the reason that there isn't more of, say, a more comprehensive statewide transportation system primarily due to lack of funds? Is it lack of planning, or is it a lack of vision, a combination of all of these, or something else?
I'll take D, all the above. Clearly, a good question. And if you've been following the Governor's Jobs and Transportation Act, oh, this is going to be recorded. I got to watch how I say this. For the first time, they've actually earmarked specific projects within that piece of legislation that ODOT and the OTC Commute have approved to, but they'll have to be funded. That's different how we have funded highway projects in the past. There's a local process, a local vetting process. They bubble up, a lot of public input, and then we develop a program on which highway projects that we're going to fund. Always more projects than money. This time in House Bill 2001, there's actually a list of projects. How many public transit projects are in that list? 0. So culture, vision, adequate funding, those are all things that sort of get in our way of trying to advance public transit, not just here in Portland, which is just remarkable for its public transit systems if you have a chance to travel to other cities, but also to rural Oregon, where the increase in age will be dramatically felt over the next 20 years. People no longer can drive. If you take them from their homes and put them into an assisted living facility, the cost of the state and the federal government is just astronomical compared to a $15 ride every couple days or once a week to get them to grocery store and church and others. But there really needs to be some leadership at the state level that says, how do we bring public transit statewide more in line with where we are now? Anyone believe there's enough money on God's green earth to build our way out of a congestion problem? There ain't. And well, I suppose you could print it a lot, but no, there isn't. So going back to recovery, everyone's heard about the Recovery Act, ARRA, American, right? Yeah, Recovery and Reinvestment Act. You know, I thought I knew this. The state got 1.8 billion, the state, Oregon, got a bunch of ARRA recovery dollars, both on the transportation side, Department of Human Services side, and education side. Let me just talk a little bit about the transportation side, and again, my little neck of the woods, transit. So it doesn't include, for public transit, the state got about $75 million. Who got the largest share of that? TriMet. But again, population, services provided, no hard feelings. Out of the 75, they got about 6 mil, about 50 million. Lane Transit got about 7 or 8. Salem-Kaiser got about 5 or 6. Bend got about 1.5, 1.2. Medford got just slightly under $1 million. I got 14.6. We went through a process. If you remember back to my slide that showed, I probably can't figure out how to get back here. it was the Small Urban and Rural Program. We used those recipients, and we took the 14.6 million, used a population formula, and gave that money out to those recipients. There's 38 of them, to say, here's your share of that pie. And so you can spend it on these things. Buses, it's all capital, buses, facilities, shelters, those kinds of things. And so they sent us back, here's how we want to spend our money. And so now we're working with the FTA to get all that paperwork in place so that they can get their projects approved and start doing those kinds of things. Out of the 14.6, almost 9 million on vehicles. We will buy about 95, not about, I know, we'll buy 95 vehicles with that money for rural Oregon. Anywhere from small passenger vans that have been fitted with wheelchair accessible ramps to the great big, 40-foot buses. And the rest of the money is working on maintenance facilities and bus shelters and those kinds of things. The folks over in Central Oregon have a great project. They're going to use solar-powered bus shelters. About a dozen of them, I think. Bend, Sisters, Prineville, all around the area. Nice little project for them. So that's my $14.4 million. This will probably confuse you. STP transfer. STP is Surface Transportation Program. It's the highway program. The monies that come from Federal Highway, FHWA, Federal Highway Administration. The Oregon Transportation Commission was on a path to spend $234 million in ARRA dollars that the highway got, and they were going to spend them on highway projects. But we had the 1,000 Friends of Oregon and several other environmental groups and other concerned citizens ask OTC to hold up. You can use that money for other things. And so during the month of February and March, OTC took a step back, solicited other kinds of projects, and we were fortunate enough to get about $6 million. Yeah, about $6 million of that money that would have been spent on highway projects to spend on public transit projects. $3 million of dollars went to MPOs, TriMet, Corvallis, those sorts of things. And I got left with the 2.9 for rural Oregon. So that's why you see that little slice of the pie in rural Oregon era dollars that we're funding. Great projects. The fact that we're replacing 95 vehicles should tell you a lot about the state of the fleet in rural Oregon. Lots of old vehicles out there, real pressing need. One-time infusion of money. Well, it'll be well spent. Probably be 6 months or so before you see one. We're going to make them put that symbol on the bus. Federal statute says that. So when you see that symbol, you'll know that's where the money came from. There's something else going on locally here that I thought I'd just share with you just a bit. And again, it highlights this absolutely strange funding world we're in. Oregon Streetcar, let's see, here, one's right there, right? Yeah. They want to expand the streetcar system. Y'all know about that? Run across the river, new bridge out south, up and down, MLK or Grand, I can't remember which. Make both? Thanks. Makes a big loop. But their first step is to expand it along this side of the river until the bridge is built. So they've had to apply to the FTA. They've got $75 million of that. The local improvement district came up with $15 million. Portland Development Commission came up with 27. Regional funds came up with 4. System development charges for 6. That builds the infrastructure and the rail. They came to us for the money. That's not true. They came to us for the money for the cars that sit on those rails. Actually, the city of Portland was successful at the last legislative session to get $20 million in lottery-backed bonds. That means they sell bonds across the country. use the revenue from lottery to pay those bonds back. They got $20 million in those bonds. They were sold back in late March. So I wish I had $20 million sitting in my office so I can look at and watch, but it's not. It's over in the Treasury. So as soon as the City of Portland enters into an agreement with a manufacturer, they'll use that money to buy 5, 6, 7 streetcars built here in Oregon. First one's, don't quote me on this, first one early 2011, I think. Sir.
As a member of the board of Portland Streetcar, let me
there
say
you go. Yeah,
thank you.
tell me.
Yeah, say thank you for the $20 million. And we have, in fact, just placed an order with Oregon Iron Works in Clackamas County for 6 vehicles, and that will create jobs here in the metropolitan region at Oregon Iron Works and subcontractors all over the region. So.
I'm not quite sure. It's been a while since I've talked with some of the folks at Oregon Streetcar, but Oregon Iron Works, located in Milwaukee, are actually gearing up so that they can build streetcars for other entities around the country. For those of you who don't know, certainly I don't think many are as old as I. 100 years ago, streetcars, I mean, that's what you had. You had streetcars everywhere. They went away. 100 years later, hey, great idea. So San Antonio, St. Louis, somewhere else in the Midwest.
Tucson will probably be their first order.
Tucson, but there was Great Lake, Cleveland. Yeah, a lot of interest in streetcar, a lot of interest, and Oregon Iron Works will be successful. Those streetcars will be made here in Oregon and help the local economy and do well. So I think mid-2011, the first one comes off the line. So be watching for that. But that's another program that we get to manage, working in a very good relationship with the City of Portland and TriMet and Streetcar Inc. in terms of working through the agreements with us, so we can give you guys the money to give to Oregon Iron Works as they build streetcars for us. Threw that in there, just it might be some interest to you. I think the next slide is that question marks thing. Yeah. Whew. Question. And most of you are still awake.
I have 2 questions, actually. The first one is, I'm curious how we stack up compared to other states. Are there any other innovative things that other states around the country are doing as far as financing public transit on the state side, different types of funds? And then the second one is on the ARRA funding. There's $8 billion, I believe, for high-speed rail intercity on a competitive basis, I think.
Yes.
And I'm just curious what Oregon is doing or looking into that. We're one of 10 high-speed rail corridors identified in the U.S., going from Eugene up to British Columbia.
Right.
And so I'm just curious what's going on with that.
Let me answer that one first. Typical bureaucratic response, not me. If you go down from my office about 50 feet, there's the ODOT Rail Division, and their administrator is working very hot and heavy on how do we get Oregon positioned along with Washington and others to take advantage of that $8 billion for competitive rail. I know she's being very aggressive about it. We do have some needs here in Oregon with the condition of the lines between Eugene to Portland and some of those sorts of things. So I just know what I hear from in various meetings that we are aggressively pursuing being a part of that competitive process. Innovation in funding. The state program is fairly innovative. We don't see much of that around the country, although I will profess that I'm not very familiar with a lot of other states. As I mentioned earlier, Amanda is looking at how other states divvy up that 5311, that small urban and rural pot. It'll be interesting to see some of the analysis that she gets back in terms of how states deal with that. We did work with PSU on doing an older adults and people with disabilities study, looking out into the future, what those populations will be and what their transportation needs will be and what those costs will be. Part of that came from a budget note from last biennium directing the Department of Human Services and ODOT to work together to try to identify new revenue sources. The two professors, Professors Dill and Professors Neal, with a group of students, really looked hard around the country on how public transit is funded. But they kept running into the 2 impediments here in Oregon. I mentioned one first earlier, constitutional prohibition on typical transportation-related taxes. So we can't use gas tax, we can't use title and reg fees, we can't use ID card driver license things. Big impediment. You see that across the country. A tax on old tires, a tax on old batteries, a surcharge on driver's licenses, all going to public transit. Can't do that in Oregon because of the constitutional restriction. What was the other major funding for systems around the country?
Sales taxes.
Absolutely. So you say sales tax in the big funny building with the gold guy on top in Salem, you get shot. When you take those two funding sources that are very typical of public transit agencies in places other than Oregon, it becomes very difficult for us to find adequate revenue sources. And so what the report said is we can't really think of innovative kinds of funding solutions because of these two problems in Oregon. We recommend, so to fund those increased needs, we simply recommend that you increase your cigarette tax. Currently it's 2 cents. They were recommending between 4 and 7 cents by 2015, and then about a penny a year after that through 2030. So funding, innovative funding stuff is pretty limited here in Oregon because of those two restrictions. Sir?
You did a whole talk on transit without mentioning ridership numbers, and does that figure into your formulas for, I guess, funding? You mentioned demographics, but does ridership numbers?
Yes, good point. In looking about this, it was the focus was around finance, but the two formulas that we do use, one for the federal pot of money and one for we do use ridership numbers. We track ridership numbers mainly because it's a federal requirement. We feed that information into federal databases, but in our formulas, we do use ridership and population as elements to that formula. Sir?
You mentioned your share from the stimulus recovery plan was 14.6 million. Now, my question was, why is it 14.6, or who was in charge to decide your share from that? Is that because the programs you have is not as important as they deserve more of the stimulus plan?
The 14.6 that came to me was from formula from the FTA. So on the public transit era money, the statute was written that money got pumped into existing FTA programs. And so the money was given out to each of those states by that existing formula. And so even though the projects are 100% match, no match requirement, great. But the projects still have to comply with all the rules and regulations around that program, in this case the 5311 program. What we then did is said we already have 38 recipients of $5311. We're going to give you this money. We know your population, we know your rides, we know your miles traveled. We're going to take that 14.4 and divide it out between you based on those formulas. And so you would get $500,000. You come back and tell us how you want to spend that money. Well, 3 buses, 2 shelters, and I need a paint job on my maintenance facility. Great. And so we'll write up grants, we call them grants, contracts, so they can use the money for that purpose. And so we did that with all those agencies. So that's how we distributed our money. But the money that came to us is from the FTA national distribution formula. Sir. Oh, sir.
How small agencies get funded? For example, if I want to know if the current funding structure is encouraging enough for small agencies to run sort of demand-responsive transportation in rural areas, or not at all?
No, we fund a lot of that. Mostly we ask that they work through a larger agency, usually a county, because we want accountability. We want to ensure that you have the financial wherewithal to manage the money and be held accountable for it. So if you're a mom and pop nonprofit and want to do a good thing, great, we love that, but go to your local, we call them STF agency. You were seeing on one of the last slides, those 42 entities, 9 tribes, 42 others. Go to them and ask if you can participate in their program. So we have some very small nonprofits that receive small amounts of money, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 to run some small dial-a-ride services. Others, we have some very large nonprofit agencies that receive money through that process, and they have actually very sophisticated programs as well. So really, we have TriMet at this end that 146 million rides in a biennium. I think it's a lot, a huge budget, all the way down to a nonprofit in Harney County that's delivering $2 or $3 rides once a week, kind of thing. There was another hand. Sir, you had a hand. I'm sorry.
Excellent presentation, but I'm very concerned. I'm familiar with the transportation history in this country past 100 years. My concern is today with the state of affairs is that not comparing us just in the United States, but globally, we're falling farther and farther behind. I've just was recently to Europe and I'm shocked with everything. I mean, your budget even has to be 100 times more to do anything else. I don't know what to say.
Let me give you the name of the legislators that would help that. You're absolutely right.
There is principal problem, Look at what made this country was farm to market roads 78 years ago. But we don't have, in today's modern time, what was equal to that.
Wouldn't disagree with the thing you say. I'm fully supportive of that. We are at a turning point in our society. I think it's hugely cultural. We still bow to the altar of the automobile in lots of different ways. As I mentioned earlier, there's just not enough money on anyone's wallet to pay for all the lanes and all the projects. Again, that equation, the demand for mobility and the supply, we have spent 80 or 100 years dealing with the supply side. More lane, more capacity, more this, and not trying to deal with how do we help manage the demand. Can we take 40 people out of their own little vehicle and put them in a bus during that commute rush? How do we do that? Are we funded where we should be? No, absolutely not. My generation, gone. We're stuck on cars. You guys, you're the ones that will move into these positions of leadership that will change how our culture, our society approaches mobility and access for our citizens. And it does start very basically, $20 million out of 3 or 4 billion for transportation. Might not be equitable. So one more hand. Oh, so John.
I'm sorry, we're out of time.
Oh,
We're past one.
I catch after the.
Okay. First of all, let's thank our speaker.
Oh. Thank you.